Picture this. A nation spends nearly $200 million and ends up with absolutely nothing to show for it. No ships, no progress, just broken promises and mounting frustration. This isn't a cautionary tale from some far-flung economy. This is New Zealand's reality, and it's a story that reveals something profound about the shifting dynamics of global manufacturing and international partnerships. Around 4 years back, New Zealand entered into what seemed like a straightforward arrangement, a $370 million contract with South Korea to construct new ferries. These weren't just any vessels. They were meant to be the lifeline connecting the country's two main islands. But within just 24 months, everything fell apart. The partnership disintegrated so completely that New Zealand's government was prepared to write a check for $85 million in cancellation penalties, just to walk away. And here's where it gets interesting. They didn't abandon the project entirely. Instead, they transferred the entire order to China this past August. So what went so catastrophically wrong with the South Korean deal? And why did Beijing emerge as the partner of choice? Let's unpack this fascinating saga. To understand why this matters so much to New Zealand, we need to go back, way back, to around 85 million years ago. During this period, massive tectonic forces were literally tearing apart Gondwana, the ancient supercontinent that included what would become New Zealand. The land that forms modern New Zealand was still intact then, a single connected mass slowly drifting away from the rest of the continental puzzle. Fast forward to roughly 1 million years ago. Geological processes continued their relentless work. The Earth's crust in this region kept sinking, while ocean levels rose and fell in cycles. Gradually, the central landmass that once joined New Zealand's northern and southern sections disappeared beneath the waves. What emerged was the Cook Strait, a body of water that has defined New Zealand's geography and transportation challenges ever since. This strait effectively split the nation into two distinct islands, the North Island and the South Island. For generations upon generations, the only way to move between them has been by ferry or aircraft. You might reasonably ask, why hasn't New Zealand simply built a bridge or excavated an underwater tunnel? After all, numerous countries have successfully connected land masses separated by water. The answer lies in the brutal reality of the Cook Strait's characteristics. In certain areas, the ocean floor plunges to depths exceeding 3,000 meters. Even the average depth hovers around 128 meters. Constructing a bridge across such an expanse would be an engineering nightmare of epic proportions, not to mention astronomically expensive. Theoretically, the shallowest sections, approximately 220 meters deep, might make an undersea tunnel feasible from a depth perspective. But here's the deal breaker. New Zealand sits squarely on one of Earth's most geologically volatile zones. The boundary where the Indo-Australian plate collides with the Pacific plate runs right through the country. This isn't some minor seismic activity we're talking about. New Zealand experiences roughly 20,000 earthquakes annually. More than 250 of these tremors are strong enough for residents to actually feel them. The Cook Strait itself occupies a particularly treacherous position where the Tasman Sea encounters the Pacific Ocean. These two massive bodies of water create tidal forces that crash into each other, generating enormous tidal variations. Water rushes through the narrow passage with tremendous force, creating some of the most dangerous and unpredictable maritime conditions anywhere on the planet. When you factor in the technical complexity, the constant earthquake risk, and the staggering financial investment required, building permanent infrastructure across the strait becomes impractical. Ferry services, despite their limitations, remain the most sensible and cost-effective solution. Let's consider the demographic reality. New Zealand's entire population barely exceeds 5 million people. More significantly, approximately 75% of these residents live on the North Island. This northern region serves as the nation's political and economic powerhouse, where the vast majority of industry, commerce, and government operations are concentrated. The South Island, by contrast, has carved out a different identity. Its economy revolves primarily around tourism and agricultural production. Given this distribution, the actual volume of inter-island travel doesn't reach the levels that would justify massive infrastructure investment. For the current demand, ferry services supplemented by small aircraft have proven adequate, at least in theory. But theory and reality have been diverging sharply. Here's the problem. The 3 ferries currently operated by Kiwi Rail are ancient by maritime standards. The oldest vessel dates back to 1988. Stop and think about that for a moment. This ship has been in continuous operation for over 3 decades. The fleet's average age stands at a shocking 31 years. When equipment reaches this level of obsolescence, breakdowns stop being occasional inconveniences and become routine disruptions. These vessels are the primary transportation arteries for inter-island movement. Each year, approximately 800,000 passengers and 250,000 vehicles make the crossing. One of these ferries even carries entire railway trains across the strait. The aging infrastructure has created a cascading series of problems. Maintenance becomes increasingly difficult as parts become obsolete. Repair costs escalate year after year. Service interruptions have transformed from rare events into expected occurrences. The warning signs emerged years before anyone took decisive action. Back in 2013, the Ferry experienced a catastrophic propeller failure mid-crossing due to metal fatigue. This forced the vessel out of service right during the peak summer travel season, the worst possible timing for both passengers and the economy. February 2023 brought another crisis when the same ship suffered a complete power failure. Imagine being aboard a large ferry in the middle of one of the world's most turbulent straits, when suddenly everything goes dark and the engines die. That's exactly what passengers experienced. Even more alarming was the incident in January 2023 involving the Kaitaki ferry. This vessel was making what should have been a routine crossing from Picton to Wellington when something went terribly wrong. All main engines failed simultaneously. Without propulsion, the ship became a massive floating object at the mercy of the strait's powerful currents, slowly drifting toward the coastline. There were roughly 850 people aboard, 850 passengers whose lives depended on backup systems and emergency procedures. New Zealand came dangerously close to witnessing a maritime disaster that would have dominated international headlines. The vessel was saved, but the incident sent shockwaves through the government and public. These weren't isolated mechanical glitches. They represented systemic failure of critical national infrastructure. The message became crystal clear. The fleet modernization couldn't be postponed any longer. Lives were at stake. Economic continuity was at risk. Something had to be done, and it had to be done urgently. When Kiwi Rail began searching for a shipbuilding partner, South Korea appeared to be an obvious choice. This wasn't a decision made lightly or based on superficial considerations. South Korea's shipbuilding credentials were genuinely impressive. The foundation was laid decades earlier when the South Korean government implemented its heavy and chemical industry development plan. Shipbuilding received designation as a strategic national industry, meaning the government would provide support, incentives, and resources to ensure the sector's success. The investment paid off spectacularly. South Korea's shipbuilding industry didn't just grow, it exploded onto the global stage. By 1993, South Korean shipyards had achieved something remarkable. They surpassed Japan in total ship orders for the first time. This wasn't a fluke. It marked the beginning of South Korea's establishment as a genuine shipbuilding superpower. 3 companies emerged as global giants: Hyundai Heavy Industries, Samsung Heavy Industries, and Daewoo Shipbuilding and Marine Engineering. These corporations didn't just build commercial vessels, they dominated multiple segments of the maritime industry. Hyundai Heavy Industries, in particular, became one of the largest shipbuilders on Earth, playing a crucial role in designing and constructing South Korea's military naval fleet. The peak came in 2018 when South Korea's shipbuilding sector captured an astounding 44% of the entire global market. Nearly half of all ships being built worldwide were coming from South Korean yards. This level of market dominance seemed unassailable. Given this track record, New Zealand's decision to partner with South Korea made perfect sense. In 2020, the government officially launched the IREX project, the Inter-Island Resilient Connection. The plan called for constructing 2 large rail-capable ferries that would completely replace the aging fleet. After conducting an open international tender process, New Zealand selected Hyundai Mipo Dockyard as its partner. The total contract value was set at $370 million. According to the agreement's specifications, South Korea would construct 2 large ferries with dual road and rail transport capabilities. Each vessel would accommodate 1,500 passengers and 40 railway carriages, powered by dual-fuel propulsion systems meeting modern safety and environmental standards. The delivery timeline was set for 2026. Everything seemed carefully planned. The partnership appeared solid. South Korea's reputation suggested reliability and quality. What could possibly go wrong? As it turned out, almost everything went wrong. The New Zealand government had initially approved a comprehensive budget of $800 million for the entire project. This figure wasn't solely for ship construction. It encompassed necessary upgrades to port facilities in both Wellington and Picton to accommodate the new vessels. Then came the first shock. The Korean design proposals arrived, and they were massive, far larger than New Zealand had anticipated. The port upgrade plans that seemed adequate during initial planning suddenly became woefully insufficient. Accommodating these enormous vessels would require extensive, large-scale port expansions that nobody had budgeted for. The financial implications hit like a freight train. The total project cost didn't just increase, it exploded to $2.3 billion. Read that again. From $800 million to $2.3 billion. Nearly a 3-fold increase from the original budget. This wasn't a minor cost overrun that could be absorbed or managed through budget reallocation. This was a fundamental reassessment of the project's financial viability. For a newly elected government facing scrutiny over public spending, such a massive budget blowout was politically untenable. Transport Minister Winston Peters addressed the situation publicly, stating that canceling the IREX shipbuilding project would save taxpayers billions of dollars in financial pressure. The government's position was clear. They couldn't justify spending this much public money regardless of how badly the new ferries were needed. But the budget explosion, while serious, wasn't even the most frustrating aspect of the failed partnership. The truly maddening element was the complete lack of tangible progress. By the time the partnership commenced, New Zealand had already transferred $44 million in installment payments to South Korea. That's not an insignificant amount. It represented genuine taxpayer money invested in good faith. According to the original timeline, ship construction was supposed to begin with deliveries starting in 2024. Yet when 2023 arrived and the project ground to a halt, South Korea still couldn't provide a definitive start date for actual construction. The project had essentially stalled completely. Think about this from the government's perspective. They'd committed substantial funds, they'd invested political capital in the project, and they'd built public expectations around resolving the ferry crisis. In return, they received nothing but delays, cost increases, and vague promises about future progress. The modernization of New Zealand's critical inter-island transport system, the entire reason this project existed, had been completely paralyzed. The government was spending money without seeing results, watching costs spiral upward, without observing any actual shipbuilding activity. For a newly installed administration looking to demonstrate fiscal responsibility and effective governance, this situation was untenable. The decision was made: cancel the $370 million shipbuilding contract and cut their losses. The expensive price of walking away. Here's where the financial pain becomes truly acute. Remember that $44 million New Zealand had already prepaid? That money was, well, effectively gone. Sunk costs with nothing to show for them. But walking away from the contract triggered additional financial penalties. New Zealand was required to pay an additional $144 million in settlement fees to South Korea. When you add this to the prepaid amount, the total cost of this failed partnership reached nearly $200 million. $200 million spent, and New Zealand didn't receive even a glimpse of a single ship hull or engine component. This might seem like an absurdly expensive mistake, and honestly, it was. But the government calculated that continuing with the project would have been even more expensive, given the escalating costs and uncertain timeline. Sometimes, the least bad option is still pretty terrible. Yet the fundamental problem remained unsolved. The aging ferries were still aging, breakdowns were still occurring, and the need for replacement vessels was becoming more urgent by the day. In July of this year, another ferry malfunction sparked nationwide concern and renewed calls for action. New Zealand couldn't simply give up on replacing its ferry fleet. The Cook Strait connection was just too vital to the nation's infrastructure and economy. They needed new ships, and they needed them soon. The question became, who could actually deliver? Why China emerged as the alternative? This past August, the New Zealand government made an announcement that surprised some observers, but made perfect sense given recent developments. The two large ferry orders would be transferred to China. While the exact contract value remains under negotiation, New Zealand has established a target delivery date of 2029. Many people might wonder what prompted this decisive shift toward Chinese shipbuilders. The answer lies in a transformation of the global shipbuilding industry that's been unfolding over the past decade and a half. Here's a fact that might surprise you. China has held the position of the world's #1 shipbuilding nation for 13 consecutive years. This isn't a recent development or a temporary achievement. It represents sustained dominance over more than a decade. The statistics from just the first half of 2025 are staggering. China accounted for over 47% of global totals across key metrics, including completed shipbuilding and new orders. Even more impressive, Chinese shipyards captured 64% of all new orders globally during that period. Nearly 2/3 of all new ship orders worldwide went to Chinese companies. But raw production capacity alone doesn't tell the complete story. China's ship design capabilities have evolved dramatically, becoming increasingly sophisticated and client-focused. Many of the new vessels being designed by Chinese firms are intentionally kept under 200 meters in length. This specific design parameter is crucial because it means ports require only minor upgrades rather than massive reconstructions to accommodate the ships. This approach directly addresses the exact problem that sank the South Korean deal, the budget-busting port expansion requirements. Chinese designers had learned from observing these kinds of project failures and adapted their approach accordingly. The timeline of China's rise to dominance. The transformation didn't happen overnight. In 2010, China achieved a significant milestone, surpassing South Korea for the first time across all three major shipbuilding indicators. This officially elevated China into the ranks of the world's premier shipbuilding nations. What followed was a decade of intense competition between Chinese and South Korean shipyards. Both countries invested heavily in technology, capacity expansion, and skilled workforce development. The competition drove innovation and efficiency improvements across the industry. The turning point arrived in 2021 when China's shipbuilding industry definitively pulled ahead. The gap wasn't marginal. It represented a fundamental shift in global manufacturing capabilities. Consider the 2024 data. Shipyards worldwide received a combined total of 2,390 new ship orders that year. Chinese shipyards alone accounted for an astonishing 70% of this global market. 70%. This level of market dominance is virtually unprecedented in modern manufacturing. This advantage isn't just significant, it's overwhelming. Chinese shipbuilders have essentially reshaped the entire industry's competitive landscape. Meanwhile, South Korea's once dominant position in shipbuilding has been steadily eroding. Understanding why this happened reveals important lessons about industrial competitiveness and strategic adaptation. One critical weakness has been South Korea's heavy reliance on standardized mass-market vessels. Korean shipyards became extraordinarily efficient at building conventional ships at scale, but they struggled to develop the capability to design and construct specialized vessels tailored to unique client requirements. The New Zealand project exemplifies this perfectly. What New Zealand needed wasn't a standard commercial ferry. They required vessels with specific dimensions, dual fuel rail capabilities, and design characteristics suited to the Cook Strait's challenging conditions. Korean firms struggled to deliver a solution that balanced these requirements with reasonable costs and timelines. Additionally, in pursuit of higher profit margins, South Korean shipbuilders have implemented aggressive cost control measures. While cost efficiency matters, this approach has sometimes compromised safety standards and quality control. A series of vessel-related incidents have damaged Korean builders' reputation in the global marketplace. When ships experience problems or fail to meet specifications, word spreads quickly among potential clients. Perhaps most significantly, South Korea's shipbuilding sector has become highly dependent on American political and economic support. This creates vulnerabilities that extend beyond pure business considerations. To maintain alignment with American policy objectives, South Korea has at times made decisions that strained its relationship with China, including supporting investigations targeting Chinese shipbuilding practices. This political positioning creates a serious practical problem. South Korea's shipbuilding industry relies heavily on China for critical raw materials, particularly steel. When diplomatic tensions escalate, this supply chain becomes unstable. Chinese suppliers might delay deliveries, increase prices, or redirect materials to other customers. For Korean shipbuilders, this translates directly into slowed production schedules and increased costs, making them less competitive precisely when they can least afford it. This geopolitical entanglement creates a strategic vulnerability that pure engineering excellence cannot overcome. In an increasingly multipolar world where supply chain security matters as much as manufacturing capability, this dependency represents a fundamental weakness. New Zealand isn't an isolated case. The pattern of countries shifting from South Korean to Chinese shipbuilders has been accelerating across multiple regions and ship categories. Take Qatar, for instance, previously a major client of South Korean shipyards. In 2024, Qatar Energy signed a massive agreement with China State Shipbuilding Corporation for 18 ultra-large LNG carriers. These aren't small vessels. Each one has a capacity of 271,000 cubic meters. The total contract value reached $5.5 billion. Qatar's reasoning for choosing China was straightforward. Chinese shipbuilding companies now possess both the technical capability and production capacity to handle such large-scale, high-specification projects. More importantly, they can do so on competitive timelines and at prices that make economic sense. Even global shipping giants from traditionally Western-aligned nations have been adjusting their strategies. Maersk, Denmark's maritime powerhouse and one of the world's largest shipping companies, has been steadily increasing its orders with Chinese shipyards over recent years. This shift represents more than just individual business decisions. It reflects a fundamental realignment of global manufacturing relationships. Countries and companies are making pragmatic choices based on capability, reliability, and value rather than traditional partnerships or political considerations. The story of New Zealand's journey from South Korea to China encapsulates larger trends reshaping global manufacturing and international trade relationships. Several key themes emerge from this saga. First, market dominance is never permanent. South Korea achieved spectacular success in shipbuilding through strategic government support and relentless execution. But maintaining that position requires continuous innovation, adaptability to client needs, and strategic awareness of changing competitive dynamics. Resting on past achievements creates vulnerability. Second, client satisfaction matters more than historical reputation. New Zealand didn't switch partners because they disliked South Korea or preferred China for ideological reasons. They switched because the South Korean partnership wasn't delivering results, while Chinese alternatives offered credible solutions to their specific problems.